Welcome everyone to the Covenant of Sinai at Drisha, where we have had the pleasure of learning these past several weeks with Rabbi Silber. One thing about this class that I'd like to highlight, I would like to thank today's class has been sponsored in the memory of Sarah Sfatman by her chavrusa, and we miss her very much. She was a dear participant in this class. And Rabbi Silber, if you have any remarks you'd like to make.
Yes, I would like to mention Sarah, who was a extremely dedicated student and learned with us for many years. She spoke up quite often. She was a distinguished professor in the Hebrew University, but the last several years, she was really, apart from her work, she really was very dedicated to study. And I will mention that when I was in Israel, whenever that was, maybe I forget when it was, just around the time that she passed. So I taught it in a class in Jerusalem in person, and she actually came to the class. She came from Givat Shmuel, which is Ramat Gan. It's quite a trip to come to the class. And she came into class had already started. She had the wrong time. It started like 20 minutes earlier. And she sat right behind me, actually. And she spoke up a couple of times. She made a couple of very interesting comments. And that week, I think, is when she died. She had come to the class, traveled all the way in, and I very much missed her. People in the class who stayed with you for a long time, you feel very connected. So may her memory be a blessing, and I have very fond memories of Sarah.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And sources for today's class will be shared on screen, but if you have your own preferred Tanakh, you are always welcome to use it. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to Rabbi Silber to get started.
Okay, let's begin. First of all, I just wanted to begin by a pasuk that we saw last week, which is in chapter 24. Chapter 24. It's the 11th pasuk. It says, "V'yel atzilei b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yodo, v'yechezu et Elohim v'yochlu v'yishtu." So that's what God had told Moshe to come up and to experience God. And the Torah says very strikingly that Moshe went up together with Aaron in verse number 9. Moshe and Aaron went up, Nadav and Avihu, 70 elders, and they beheld the God of Israel. Vayiru et Elohei Yisrael. And the Torah describes what they saw under his feet, literally, etc. Sapphire stones, purity of heaven. And then, V'yel atzilei b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yodo. And God did not harm atzilei b'nei Yisrael. So what does atzilei b'nei Yisrael mean? Is the question. So some of the commentaries say the elders of Israel, atzilei b'nei Yisrael, the elders of Israel. But the word atzilei is a curious word. It doesn't appear that often in the Torah, but it does appear in one place, and I want to talk about that briefly, where it does appear. Not the word atzilei, but the idea of atzilei, in my opinion. And that is in the 11th chapter of Bamidbar. In the 11th chapter of Bamidbar, that's where things start going downhill very quickly for the Jewish people. Complaints. First they complain about something in the beginning of chapter 11, and the Torah doesn't specify what they complain about, which is very unusual. Then they complain about the food. They have no food, they have the same food all the time, the man, there's no variety, etc. Chapter 11, and Moshe is very upset. You recall Moshe turns to God in chapter 11 and says two things. First of all, I can't take it anymore. How can I provide all these people what they want? They want meat. They want what they want. How can I provide them with these things? That's one complaint. And Moshe says, in general, I can't do it myself. It's too much for me. Can't handle it. So God responds to Moshe in chapter 11 and says the following: gather 70. The first response, God first deals with the issue of Moshe needs help. So God said to Moshe, gather 70 people. This is chapter 11 of Bamidbar, verse number 16. And bring them together with you to the Oel Moed, to the Mishkan. And now we have verse number 17 in response to Lazarus' question. I will go down and speak to you there. V'yatzalti min haruach. There you have the word v'yatzalti. So what does the word v'yatzalti mean? Here they translate, I will draw upon the Spirit. I will draw upon this Spirit that is upon you and place it on them. Now, so there's the word atzalti. We know in Kabbalah they talk about four different worlds, as it were. The world of one of the first worlds is the world of Atzilut. There's the world of Atzilut. There's the world of Bria. There's the world of Asiya. There's a fourth world I'm blocking on now. Yitzira, the world of Yitzira. Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya, the four worlds. The world of Atzila. And I believe that I think I'm suggesting that Atzilei B'nai Israel, right? Over here, it's the people who Moshe's spirit will descend upon them. The 70, there'll be 70 leaders, right? Earlier, the Torah spoke of the 70 elders, the Zikanim, which is what the commentaries speak about, but it's probably related to the word Eitzel. In other words, in the book of Bamidbar, from this point on is my suggestion, the book of Bamidbar, God's point in the book of Bamidbar is that the 70 elders of Israel who will join with Moshe in leading the people, that their spirit, in other words, that Moshe is to gather them to the tent, and the spirit of Moses will descend upon them. And when we studied Bamidbar, whenever that was, I pointed out that these 70 elders don't seem to have any actual credentials. The Torah says about the 70 elders, gather 70 people of the elders, you know they are the leaders of the people. In other words, these are the leaders that the people want. These are members of the community that are desirable for the people. Now, the point is, the people at this point are complaining that they don't like the food. Remember the fish and the watermelons of Egypt. That's the level the people are on. So the people, when the people want leaders like themselves, you're going to get leaders like themselves. In other words, what they're lacking is any serious credentials. They were leaders of the people's people, but doesn't mean they actually have any objective credentials. Unlike elsewhere in the Torah, it talks about God-fearing, courageous, or in the book of Devarim, they have a lot of knowledge, they're wise. Here, there's neither wisdom nor courage necessarily. And the point of the Chumash is that God's point to Moshe is that some of your spirit has to be imparted to them. They don't have spirit in and of themselves. And that's the Atzilei from the word Eitzel. They are to come together with you, Moshe, so I can place your spirit upon them. So I was thinking in those terms, in that vein, that over here we have the same thing. God said to Moshe, come up to the mountain, you and Aaron and the 70 elders, Nadav and Avihu, right? And you will see God, but only Moshe will enter all the way to the top. The others remain at a distance. And they beheld God. Atzilei B'nai Israel. These are called the Atzilim. Why are they called the Atzilim? Because fundamentally, God's connection is with Moshe. Moshe is the one who's going to truly enter into the hour, into the cloud, into the darkness, be close to God. The others are coming as Moshe's assistants, as it were, and Moshe's seconds. So here the Torah calls them Atzilei. Atzilei suggests that in and of themselves, they don't have the proper credentials. They're there because they are accompanying Moshe. That's an important point. That's what the Torah says, El Atzilei B'nai Yisrael Lo Shalach Yado, that God did not harm them, which suggests to us that ordinarily, if they would stand in God's presence, they would be harmed. Standing God's presence is dangerous, and especially if you're not worthy. And there's something over here that the Chumash is saying fundamentally, they're not worthy of this experience, but for whatever reason, God allows it. Spoke last week about God wanting this covenant, despite the potential unworthiness of the people on the other side. And over here, it's the Atzilim. They're coming together with Moshe. They're coming as part of this experience, but they don't necessarily deserve it, or in a status where this kind of relation makes sense. And therefore, Torah has to say, but God did not harm them, because ordinarily they would be in mortal danger. That's what I have to say about the word Atzilim. And I connect it to the story in Bamidbar, chapter 11. Anyway, thank you for the question. That was an opportunity to say something about Atzilim, and a suggestion about what it means over there, and a suggestion about what it means over here. And by the way, in the story in Bamidbar, chapter 11, where God said to Moshe, gather the people to the tents, to the Oel Moed, and I will place your spirit upon them. There's a lot more to say about that, but I will add one detail, which is this, that in that story, as you probably remember, the Torah says, God said gather 70 elders. But the Torah says that two of these designated people, because they were designated, but two of the designated people did not show up to the center. Two of the designated people stayed inside the camp. Shem ha'achad Eldad v'shem ha'sheni Meidad. Eldad and Meidad did not go to the center, did not go where Moshe was to receive his spirit. They remained in the camp, and they prophesied in the camp. And that's the story where someone runs over to Moshe and says, Eldad and Meidad mitnabim ba'machaneh. They are prophesying in the camp. In the camp as opposed to they didn't go to the Oel Moed. They didn't get your spirit. In other words, there's another dimension over there. And that is placing your spirit upon them. Doesn't speak only about the unworthiness. But what God is saying to Moshe is, I'm going to get you helpers. But the helpers have to understand they're not you. They're your assistants. And that's why it's very important that they come to the center and receive your spirit. So they understand that you're the one in charge, and they have to report to you. When Eldad and Meidad don't do that, and they prophesy in the camp, they don't go Eitzel, as it were, and Yoshua is standing with Moshe, and they're told that Eldad and Meidad are prophesying in the camp, and Yoshua says, Adoni Moshe Klaim, lock them up, shut them up, because Yoshua sees this as insubordination to Moshe. That's his point. They're supposed to receive your spirit. They're supposed to stand next to you. They're prophesying independently of you. That's not right. And Moshe responds, I don't care. Says Moshe, that's a whole other discussion, which when we studied Bamidbar, I talked about that at length. But that's another dimension of the Eitzel in the case, and it highlights the Eldad and Meidad story. Why Yoshua is so upset about this. Because they're supposed to receive your spirit, second to you. Here they are prophesying without you. That's dangerous, says Yoshua. Moshe doesn't think so. Anyway, that's my short answer to Atzilei B'nai Yisrael. Okay, fine. Thank you for the question. And now let us begin. Okay, so the plan is the following. We're going to finish up chapter 24 just very briefly. And then we're going to skip to chapter 32. The very end of chapter 31 and 32, it's the story of the golden calf. What we are skipping is the Mishkan. The instructions about building the Mishkan, which Moshe is given in chapter 25, all the way through almost to the end of chapter 31. That will skip for now, but we hope to return to that in the future. We're skipping two things here. We're skipping the Mishkan, which occupies about 12 chapters from here on to the end of the book. And we're also passing over the rules that we have in Parshat Mishpatim, what's called the Sefer HaBrit, the book of the covenant. We're not dealing with that. But that will be in the next set of sessions. I'm going to go back and look at some of the laws that we've skipped. They're very interesting. Can't do all the laws, but we're going to talk about the laws that we find in the book of the covenant. But the plan is from here on in to just focus on the golden calf. So let's pick up at the very end of chapter 24. Very end of chapter 24, we have the following. The Moshe was told to go up to the mountain together with the others. Vayom Moshe, let's start with verse number 12. Vayom Hashem Moshe, Alei Elai Ahara Vayesham. Says God to Moshe, come up to the mountain. Vayesham. Vayesham means and be there, stay there. In other words, you're not just coming up to the mountain for a few minutes or a few hours. Vayesham. Stay there, you'll be there for a while. I will give you the tablets. Moshe has not taken down the tablets, the Luchot HaBrit. And I will give you the tablets. And the Torah and the mitzvah that I have written to teach them. It's very unclear, actually. What does it mean, ha-Torah v'ha-mitzvah? What Torah and mitzvah? Because when you look at what Moshe is given, the Torah says nothing about Torah and mitzvah. It talks about the tablets. But what Moshe is given for the next many chapters are the laws about building the Mishkan. According to Rashi, it's not a problem. According to Rashi, remember, Rashi thought that the whole Sefer HaBrit, Parshat Mishpatim, took place before Matan Torah, before Sinai. So what God may be referring to are all of these laws that was given to Moshe earlier, right? The Mishpatim. Although it doesn't say that God wrote them down, it says Moshe wrote them. That's a separate question. But according to the Ramban, according to the plain reading of the Chumash, everything's in order. So we already have the Sefer HaBrit. And now God says, come back up the mountain, and I will give you the tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah, which I wrote down. But what Torah and mitzvah? That's an important question. What Torah and mitzvah are we talking about? I'm not going to respond to that question now. In the future, we'll deal with that. But I want to point out the obvious problem. In any event, Moshe is summoned back up the mountain and to stay there for a while. V'heyesham. Notice, and this is an important point.
I don't understand what Rashi's. How do you understand? How did Rashi explain Torah and mitzvah?
Rashi doesn't say explicitly over here, but according to Rashi, all of the previous chapters were given before Matan Torah. According to Rashi, Parshat Mishpatim takes place before the Ten Commandments. Right? That's what Rashi said. Rashi said Moshe came down the mountain and he writes and he's given all of these rules, right? The point is that according to the Ramban, but according to Rashi, that God could have said beforehand, come up to the mountain. The speech to Moshe is taking place, let's say, on the third day of the third day of Sivan. God says, come back up the mountain, and I'm going to give you the Luchot, and I'm going to give you these other laws, right? But according to the Ramban, God, Moshe already has the other laws. So now when God says, come back up the mountain, I'll give you the Torah and mitzvah, it can't be referring, it's the tablets the Ten Commandments they heard part of it. You have to receive them. But the Torah and the mitzvah come in, but wait a minute, I'm going to give you the Torah and the mitzvah. We already have the Torah and mitzvah, right? So what is God giving them? What God gives Moshe next are the commands about the Mishkan, right? So what is it? I'm going to give you the tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah. So it could mean perhaps, I mean, maybe according to the Ramban, it means kind of an explanation of the Torah and the mitzvah, kind of Torah Sheba'al Peh. I'm going to give you something additional. There's something additional which Moshe is being given, which is not explicit in the Chumash. What's explicit in the Chumash are the rules about the Mishkan. That's explicit for 6 chapters, but the Torah and mitzvah is not explicit. Anyway, that's this question. What is the Torah and mitzvah according to this? What Torah and mitzvah? Very strange, actually. Anyway, fine. So Moshe summoned back up the mountain. Now we have the following little story. Vayakam Moshe, v'Yoshua misharto, vayal Moshe el har Elohim. Now we have a strange thing. So Moshe got up to leave, together with Yoshua, his attendant, his protege, right? His misharto, right? And the question, of course, is, and Moshe went up to the mountain. That's what Moshe's going up to the mountain. Yoshua accompanies him. As Rashi says, Lo yodati ma tivo shel Yoshua kan. What is Yoshua doing? He doesn't go up with Moshe. Yoshua waits at the bottom of the mountain. What it actually sounds like, and I think Rashi suggests this, is that Yoshua doesn't have any real function over here, but he's Moshe's Bashares. Wherever Moshe goes, Yoshua goes. He's his attendant, basically. He's his protege. Wherever he goes, he's accompanied, right? Reminds me of the story of Eliyahu Hanavi when he ascends to heaven. Elisha goes with him. Every place he goes, Elisha goes with him. Yoshua and Eliyahu says, "Stay here. You don't have to come with me." No, I'm not leaving you. That's the sense you get over here. But he plays no actual role in terms of receiving the Torah. He's not on the mountain. He waits on the bottom of the mountain. He plays a role in the story, but he's not going to be the recipient of the Torah. Moshe receives the Torah. But Yoshua is going to go with Moshe. That's important for later on. And Moshe goes to the mountain. But before Moshe goes to the mountain, we have the following verse.
Rabbi Silber.
Yes.
There's a parallel here between this and the Akedah, where they go together, and at some point the Narov they stay behind, and then he meets them again on the way down.
That could be. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I mean, the truth is that the people staying behind is not so much Yoshua. You're right about Yoshua. He goes to a point. In other words, if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is that the idea of Yoshua not going up with them underscores that Moshe goes alone. You have that the Akedah. The Akedah, you have these two other Na'arim who go with Abraham. And Abraham says to the two Na'arim, you stay here. Ani va'anar ne'ocho aiko. Me and the Yitzchak with the Nar, we're going to go there.
Shvulechem po.
Shvulechem po. You stay here, and we're going to go ko, right? We're going to go ko, and you stay po, right? So that they emphasize the separateness of the Yitzchak from the others, the aloneness of Abraham. It's possible that Yoshua going to a point and waiting, that's part of it. But we'll see later on. There's another reason that Yoshua goes. He plays another function in the story, actually. We'll get to that. That's later on.
I thought it was to situate him away from the people so that he doesn't know what's happening.
That's right. That comes up later. That's true. That's the point later on. He doesn't know what's going on later on. The Torah is saying it up over here. That is what I want to get at. We'll get to that later on. Exactly that point. But to the Zakanim, Moshe says, you stay here until we return, even though the we is mostly himself, because Yoshua has no role. It's in the plural. And behold, he says, Aaron and Hur are with you. What does that mean? Whoever has a matter should approach them. Now, let me just point out something about this expression. First of all, Moshe is leaving, and he's leaving behind Aaron and Hur. The role of Aaron and Hur in this pasuk is clear. Mibal dvarim yigash alehem. Who has bal dvarim, who has a davar, should approach them. Here, the important point is that the word davar can mean many things, a word, a thing, but in particular, the word davar often functions as a legal matter. We had that earlier in Parshat Yitro, with the word davar over and over again, right? What is this davar that you are doing? Yitro says to Moshe, who's sitting alone. Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh, right? And the context over there is all about judging, about judgment. So the word davar is used in that context over and over again about some kind of a legal matter, a judgment, a decision made by the court. By the way, the other place where you have maybe more than one place, but one place where the word davar is mentioned over and over and over again, and carries with it the aspect of judgment, of rendering a decision, is in Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther, we have the word davar. I could give a shiur on that, but take my word for it for now. And there you have the davar, right? And yes, in the mibal dvarim yigash alehem, the expression a bal davar, which is also a Yiddish expression, but it's in the Talmud. A bal davar is a person who has standing in court. If you say I owe you $100, then you take me to court. So I go to court, you go to court. If a third party comes and says, 1 second, I'm going to, and it speaks for me on my behalf and says to you, how can you say he owes you $100? The court would say, listen, if you're not a witness, then you can be a witness. But if you're not a witness, you get lost because you have no standing in the case. You're not a Baal Davar. So Baal Davar in the Gemara at exactly this point. Whoever has a legal matter, a case, should approach them. Now, the reason this is very interesting is, among other reasons, is the following. That Aaron and Hur are mentioned together over here. We have already encountered Aaron and Hur in our study. Because I'm sure you all remember,
Amalek.
in chapter 17, in the story of Amalek, it says that Moshe ascended the mountain. When Moshe would raise his hands up, Israel would be victorious against Amalek. And when Moshe's hands when he put down his hands, then Amalek would be winning. Bidei Moshe kvedim, Moshe's hands were heavy, so they sat him down on a rock. Aaron v'Hur tamchu biyadav, and Aaron and Hur assisted him. They held his hands up. This on this side and this on this side. Mizeh echad and mizeh echad. When we studied that story of the Amalek, what I pointed out was that you can see Moshe sitting on top of the mountain there in two different ways. You can see him as praying, when his hands are raised up in prayer, and when he stops praying, Israel is not winning. Or you can read it another way, additionally, which is a kind of judgment. He sits in judgment. It's not clear for the Chumash how this case should end. On one hand, it's Amalek. On the other hand, Israel has been complaining from the moment we leave Egypt. All we do is complain. And Moshe is sitting in judgment. And they did when he put his hands down, suggests more than his hands are heavy, but he puts his hands, it's unclear. And Aaron and Hur then, and Moshe, the three of them together are a kind of court. Here we have the idea of the court being three people. And Aaron and Hur are helping assisting in the judgment, and they move the scale in the positive sense. Because there you have the two of them supporting the hands, keeping the hands up, means you have two votes where Israel is deemed to be innocent, should be victorious, and Moshe has his doubts. Moshe's unclear, but it's 2.5 against the half, I guess, or whatever. And my point is, here you have Aaron and Hur as judges. That's what Moshe says. I'm leaving. One of the three is gone. We had a bedin of three in the Amalek episode, and now we have a bedin of two. It's funny. The Gemara has a whole discussion in the beginning of Tractate Sanhedrin if a court of two was valid or not. But in this particular case, it is a court of two. And notice the language, Mibal Dvarim Yigash Alayhem, should approach them. The word Yigash is a word that carries with it approach with reverence, approach gingerly, approach with a certain amount of respect. Mibal Dvarim Yigash Alayhem. So Moshe leaves them in charge. Aaron and Hur are in charge. Whoever has a matter, whoever has a case, whoever has a complaint, should approach them. That's very important, and we'll get to that later on. But I just wanted to put it in terms of the Amalek story that we had studied. But anyway, now we have the following. Vayal Moshe Lahar, Vayichas. So Moshe leaves. He goes to the mountain, and the cloud covers the mountain. Vayishkon Kvod Hashem al Har Sinai. Vayichaseu Ha'anon Sheshet Yamim. Vayikro Moshe Bayom HaShvi'i. Bitoch Ha'anon. The cloud had covered the mountain for 6 days. On the seventh day, Moshe leaves the people. and Moshe ascends the mountain. Umarei kvod Hashem ki yesh ochelet b'rosh hahar. The image of God's presence. It's like a burning fire on the top of the mountain. Li'enei b'nei Yisrael. Everybody sees Moshe entering into what appears to be the fire. Vayavo Moshe b'tocha, and Moshe enters into the dark cloud. Vayal el ahar, he goes up to the mountain. Vahi Moshe bahar, arba'im yom v'arba'im laila. Moshe was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now we're going to come back to these verses because there's a parallel to these verses in the very last verses of the book of Shemot. The very end of the book of Shemot, we have a description which is exactly parallel to what we have over here in chapter 24. I didn't want to make one point about this before we stop, take some comments and questions, and we'll start with the golden calf. And that is a very important point, that Moshe never says to the people how many days he's going to be away. The Torah tells us he was away, in fact, 40 days and 40 nights. But there's no intimation in the Chumash that the people know that. All God had said to Moshe was, go up to the mountain, v'heyesham, and stay there, be there for a while. And what does a while mean? So the idea Moshe could not have told the people, I'll be away for 40 days. I'm talking about this, the plain reading of the text. He could not possibly have said that to the people because he has no clue himself how long he's going to be there. Torah says he's there for 40 days and 40 nights. And by the way, the idea of being there for 40 days, the number 40, suggests a number 40 in general suggests transition. A generation is 40 years. 40 days of the spies, 40 years in the desert. Most of the judges reign either for 40 years, sometimes for 80 years, sometimes half a generation, 20 years. So the idea of 40 being a transitional time.
The Mabul.
Mabul, exactly. The Mabul, excellent example. The Mabul, 40 days of rain, etc. So but Moshe doesn't know that. In the simple reading of the text, Moshe has no idea. So it's not that the Midrashim, it's 40 days, how do you count the 40 days? That's all in the vein of the Midrash. But the Torah says nothing of the sort. It says Moshe says, I'll be away for a while, and on top of that, he leaves people in charge. In his absence, in other words, my point, I recently heard someone say Moshe was derelict over here. No, the Chumash doesn't suggest that at all. The Chumash says he left because God tells him to leave. He doesn't know how long, but he tries his best to put people in charge when he's gone. He speaks to the elders. He has Aaron, his brother, and the number 2 guy, and together with Hur as judges. He does the best he can. In his absence, however long it's going to be, that things will be able to run. It doesn't work out that way, but I wouldn't put the blame upon Moshe. But we'll get to that when we start with the golden calf. Okay, we're going to start the story of the golden calf. We're skipping over all the instructions about the Mishkan. We're going to pick up the very last verse of chapter 31. And before we start, does anybody have any comments or questions about what we've seen till now?
Yes, Rabbi Silber, why this division into the first 7 days, and then he goes on to be there for 40 days?
Right, so what are these numbers you're asking about?
No, it's not the numbers, but why the stopping of the action, so to speak?
Well, I don't have anything profound to say about it. I just think that the idea of a cloud covering for 6 days and entering on the 7th day, the 7th day is the day that's different, that's the day that's special. It's a way of highlighting what the Chumash wants to highlight, that this event is a singular event. Matan Torah is a singular event. The idea of the same way that Shabbat is a special day of the week, it's the 7th day. It's different than the other days. It's the blessed day. It's the sacred day. Moshe is going up to the mountain. He's going there to receive laws. God will teach him various things, Torah, mitzvah, the Mishkan. And there's also about this connection to God, this profound, deep connection to God. That is part of the experience of Sinai. We've spoken about that, the day of revelation. And I think that's what the Chumash is emphasizing, going on the seventh day, 40 days, transition. Moshe is a transformed person. When he's going to come down that mountain, each time he's something's happened to him. And the idea that, if I were giving a sermon or something, which I don't typically do, I would talk about the possibility of the Torah to be transformative. That the study of Torah, if done properly, can actually change the person. So it's not just about knowledge, it's a kind of religious experience. And I think all of this is pointing us in that direction. And that's why this is such a singular event. It's a public revelation of sorts. It's a very profound revelation. It doesn't take place in one moment. Moshe is there for 40 days. 40 days is a long time. So something happens to Moshe, and then Moshe's role will be to impart that to the people, both in terms, I think, of the content, and also to be a model, perhaps, of sorts for the people as well. That's the 7 and the 40. Anybody else for any kind of comment here? Otherwise, we will begin our study. Okay, if there's always can speak up. Okay, let us now begin. We're moving past the Mishkan. Now we have the following. The last verse of chapter 31. Vayitena Moshe kechaloto ledaber ito b'har Sinai shnei luchot ha'idut luchot even ketuvim b'etzba Elohim. Okay, Moshe now was on the mountain for these 40 days, and at the end of it, after God has completed speaking to Moshe, he's given 2 luchot ha'idut, literally tablets of testimony. Luchot even ketuvim b'etzba Elohim. So God gives Moshe these tablets, and the tablets were written by God. Literally, ketuvim b'etzba Elohim, the finger of God. God writes the tablets. It sounds like the tablets are God's tablets, and the writing is God's writing. And that's what Moshe is given at the end of this experience. Fine. So far, so good. And now we have the story of the golden calf. Everything has changed. By the way, I just wanted to say one thing. I mentioned this, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. And that is, when you read the book of Devarim, the claim of Sefer Devarim seems to be that apart from what we read and studied in chapters 20, we haven't gone through the details, but the book of the covenant, chapter 24, which is the rules of, as the Ramban says, it's Mishpatim, chapter 21, 22, 23, the end of chapter 20. But in the book of Devarim, it says something else, that Moshe was told when he was on top of the mountain a lot of other laws that he doesn't tell the people. And the claim that Sefer Devarim makes is that Moshe, towards the very end of his life, says to the people, there are a whole bunch of other laws I was taught by God when I was at Har Sinai, and now I'm going to tell them to you before you enter the land. So the book of Devarim then, God says to Moshe, come up the mountain, I'll give you the tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah. The Torah and the mitzvah in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Devarim, could well refer to all these other mitzvot that Moshe has given, all these other things. Moshe has given many, many other things, and in fact, many of them are not reported to the people, even though he's a prophet. The prophet's supposed to, when a prophet receives a prophecy, the prophet's supposed to reveal the prophecy to the people. The Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin talks about the prophet who withholds his prophecy. It's a serious crime. So Moshe withheld this prophecy for close to 40 years. In the book of Devarim, the claim is, and now it's time, says Moshe, to reveal these additional mitzvot. And the book of Devarim is replete with additional mitzvot. In any event, that's just a detail from our study in the past couple of weeks. Okay, everything's looking fine and rosy, and now we have the following, chapter 32. Here we are. Vayaram ki boshesh Moshe laredet minahar. The people saw that Moshe delayed. Moshe was delayed in coming down from the mountain. Now, as I pointed out the people have no idea how long he is supposed to be there, because he didn't know himself. He couldn't hardly tell them how long. We know the Torah has told us he was there for 40 days, but Moshe doesn't know. So what does it mean he's late? He's delayed. So obviously, it doesn't mean in the pshat of it, okay? There are all kinds of midrashim that he did say 40. Okay, but let's leave that out, because that's not the plain reading of the text. And we are interested in pshuto shel mikra. But it has to do more with the people. He's not, where is he? Where is he? In other words, there's a fundamental insecurity that people have. Let's start that with that. There's an insecurity. The longer he tarries, the more the people are worrying. In their conception, he's tarrying. He should be back already, right? Boshesh, he should be back already. It reminds me of, we have a similar word in the story of Devorah, in the book of Shoftim, right? The end of the song of Devorah. And you have the image there of the mother of Sisera, Sisera's mother. She's waiting for him to return. Of course, he's dead, but she's waiting for him to return. Madua boshesh richbo lavo. Why is his chariot late? Where is he? And in that particular case, the concern is, and the truth is, because he died. And the women around to try to console her. He's busy taking spoils, whatever. But the reader knows that he's dead. And the suggestion in the song is that she has an inkling that something's very wrong. That's the boshesh. So over here, if we transport that to over here, ki boshesh Moshe l'redet min hahar, we could easily understand maybe he's never coming back. Maybe he's dead. After all, they saw Moshe walk into the great fire of Sinai. The deep cloud, the fire is burning on the mountain. As far as they're concerned, it's a place of great danger. They were told, don't get too close. Don't get too close. So the fear then, I presume, is that he basically is not alive. That we know that people say to Moshe explicitly, the encounter with God is dangerous. We're afraid we're going to die. And Moshe goes into the cloud. Maybe Moshe has died. That, I think, is the simple reading of the Chumash. They have no idea how many days, but they have basic fear and insecurity about the entire experience. Ki boshesh Moshe l'redet min hahar. So what do? Vayikahel ha'am al Aaron. The people gathered about Aaron. Vayikahel ha'am al Aaron. They gathered about him. Vayomru, and they said, Kuma selonu Elohim asher yochu lefaneinu. Arise and make for us an Elohim who will walk before us. Ki zeh Moshe ha'ish, for Moses the man. Asher helanu me'eretz Mitzrayim lo yadanu me'hayalo. For Moshe, the man who took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Here there's an enormous amount of commentary about, as one might expect, about the golden calf. So I'm going to just suggest what I think is the simplest reading of the text, that's all. And that is that the way it starts in any event, the people want somebody to replace Moshe. Moshe was the one who took us out of Egypt. Now, they don't believe that Moshe alone took them out of Egypt necessarily. After all, they experienced all the miracles, and they saw the hand of God at the sea. But Moshe was God's representative. Through Moshe, God was working through Moshe. But at the end of the day, Moshe ha'ish, Moshe is a human being. As a human being, he is mortal. He's vulnerable. And we don't want that. We need a different kind of, we need something else through whom God can work. Let's put it that way. Not a person who's an ish, because she's gone. We want something that can be with us, that won't disappear. And therefore, make for us an image, an Elohim, who will walk before us. That is to say, walk before us as Moshe did. He will be the means through which God will continue to lead us. That, I think, is the view of many of the commentaries. Now, it doesn't start out as idolatry in the sense, what is idolatry? Idolatry means and mixing up the means and the ends. When you give something a permanence or a value, because you think it is in itself sacred, without the recognition that no, it's there to enable God to relate to us. That's idolatry. So it didn't start off this way. So what often happens is something that initially is a means to an end can actually become an end in itself, and that's idolatry. And I think one of the deepest teachings, lessons of the story of the golden calf that Moshe teaches us later on is that anything can become idolatry, including the tablets of God. And of course, certainly the Torah. The Torah can become an idol. That's the great message that Moshe teaches us when he smashes the tablets. Tablets have to be broken. Because if they give them the tablets, they'll think the tablets have an intrinsic sanctity, and they don't. They're only sacred because God gives it to us. But in any event, the point is, we'll get to that very important lesson later on. That's how it starts. Zeh Moshe Ha'ish. And I would just add one other detail, which I think is a deep truth about the story here and about life in general. And that is that when people operate out of fear, that's when you get into big trouble. That's what motivated this. It's the fear of the people. They turn to this Elohim, turn to this image they want Aaron to make, right? Notice that Hur is not mentioned. They don't mention Hur at all. The Medrash has Hur being killed by the people, but the simple reading is Aaron is the second in command. Aaron is the one who eventually becomes the Kohen. He's the one who's going to serve God and serve the people. So they turn to Aaron and they say, make for us this Elohim. But they do it out of a fear. And notice that when they approach Aaron over here, they don't do what Moshe had told them to do. What did Moshe say? Mibal dvarim yigash alehem. Whoever has a matter, question of judgment, yigash alehem. Well, geshet means to approach someone gingerly, typically. By yigash love Yehuda. Here it doesn't say yigash. By yikahel al Aaron. Sounds like you can visualize this, the people sort of surrounding Aaron. They're not going to request. They're going to demand, right? Kum, get up and make for us this Elohim. So the very way in which they approach it was counter to what Moshe had said. But again, I want to emphasize that when you operate out of fear is when you get in deep trouble. And I had mentioned many times, one of the things that my mother taught me when I was a kid, and I think it has all kinds of very practical relevance today. I'm not going to get into that, but and that is the story when the angels come to Abraham and to Sarah to tell them that they were going to have a child. They actually come to Sarah and they ask Abraham, where is your wife? Where is Sarah? She's in the tent. And the Torah says the tent was behind them. And Sarah could hear what they were saying. And they said that this time next year, Sarah will have a child, which was scientifically impossible. It had to be a miracle. And when Sarah hears this, she laughs. Right? How could it be? She says to herself. She laughed to herself. How could I have a child? I'm too old for that, and my husband's old. And someone says to Abraham, why does Sarah laugh? Does she think it's impossible? Is anything impossible for God? And then Sarah is maybe Abraham said to Sarah, someone says to Sarah, why did you laugh? And Sarah said, I didn't laugh. But she says, I didn't laugh. She was afraid. Vayomer, he said, maybe Abraham says, no, you did laugh. And my mother said, remember as a kid, why do people lie? Often because they're afraid. Because they're afraid. So they tell all kinds of lies. And that's what motivates lying. And that's what motivates decisions very often that are very bad decisions to make. But it's done out of fear and insecurity. And that's what you have. That's how the ego starts. The ego starts with Vayara'am Kiboshesh Moshe. Our leader is gone. What are we going to do? We need something else. and they make a very bad decision. And we remember that not just is the first of the 10 commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. That's one thing. But afterwards, in chapter 20, towards the end of chapter 20, when people said to Moshe, we don't want to hear God's voice anymore. You should speak to God and tell us what God says. And the first thing God says to Moshe is, very first thing at the end of chapter 20, Elohei kesef, Elohei zahav, lo tasu lachem. Make for yourselves do not make gods of silver or gods of gold. Elohei zahav, kesef, Elohei zahav. The golden calf is Elohei zahav, Ego zahav, right? It's a violation, and this is an incredibly important point. The reason the ego is such an important story is it's a sin, obviously, a grievous sin, but it's where the ego is found. The ego is present in the Chumash immediately after we've been told in no uncertain terms, make for yourself, I'm the only God. And then explicitly to Moshe at the end of chapter 20, Elohei kesef, Elohei zahav, lo tasu lachem. Make for yourself neither gods of silver or gold. So it's a violation of, it's not, paragraph 27, clause 21. It's paragraph 1, right in the beginning, and more than once, actually. So this is the problem. But it starts with a replacement for Moshe. Okay, now let's see how this story.
Rabbi Silber,
Yes.
it's interesting that in the expression for Ish Moshe Asher Elonim Mitzrayim, that there is the language of objectification begins right there. They no longer talk of him as just by his name, but they give this as if he was an object, a full description.
It
I
also,
suggest he's a mortal. He's a mortal object. He's an Ish.
and he's also, when he's at the well, it says Ish, by the well with the girls.
Yes, it does say, but that is true. It does say that, right? Also, Ish Mitzri Tzilanu Minerolim is there as well. That's true. Ish carries with it several connotations, but in the case over here,
and he also becomes,
I think it's about being a mortal person.
Elohim, so that's the Ish is bouncing back and forth depending on Moses' role. First he's Ish Mitzri, then he becomes Ish Elohim. I mean, it's his job and his evolution, his transformation.
Right, but my point over here is that what the people are saying, Moses, the person, is gone. People are gone. No one's around forever. Moshe's gone.
Right.
So we need something that's permanent. That's what they're saying. We don't want a niche. We need something permanent. Make for us something permanent, not a person. Make for us an idol, essentially, which we can maintain for a very, very long time. Right? It's not going to die.
It always reminds me of, let's say, children who are in nursery school and they're fine all day, but then it comes when it's dismissal time, then they all start to cry because they can only hold on to it for so long. And they need, like, their security blanket, they need something. And when Moshe, when it passes a certain amount of time, they get very insecure. And then they gang up on Aaron. And then they say, we need something.
Agree. I totally agree. Especially given the fact, by the way, just add one point in the spirit of what you're saying is that one way to understand the story of the Jewish people in the desert is exactly this point. To think of it in terms of a child who has to grow up. And the Jewish people are children at this point. This is the beginning of our history. We got out of Egypt 3 months ago, basically. We were slaves for many, many years. And we just recently have freedom. We have free means you make your own decisions. You're independent. We don't know what it means to be independent still. We still have a slave mentality. And that's the problem over here. So we have to learn to see the experience of the desert as one of growth. That's one way to see the desert experience.
Right, but Rabbi, how does that explain Aharon's behavior? I've never ever been able to.
We haven't gotten to Aaron yet. That's the next.
I know
that's the next.
Debbie's right. And on one level, Debbie's right, but on the other end, I mean, Aaron's not a child.
No, we'll get to Aaron now. Aaron's the next person. We'll see what Aaron is.
All right.
The whole discussion. Aaron's the whole topic.
Moshe is Hashem also.
Aaron is the next topic.
Robert Silber,
Yeah.
just going back a second. Is there any connection between Etzba Elohim that it says here, and that that's here the Pharaoh's
right.
mistake, Etzba Elohim here? Is there
Oh,
anything to be
maybe.
learned from that? Or
Yeah,
it's just an
those are the
accident?
two places we have Etzba Elohim, with the story of Paro with the third plague, Kinim. Chatumim Sota Paro Etzba Elohimi, and you have it, of course. We also had Yad Hashem. We have Yad Hashem many times, God's hand, God's finger, possibly connected. That's a good point. Those are the two places we do have Etzba. I have some thoughts about it, but not for now. Let's get to the next. Let's get to Aaron first. There's 100 different things that come up over here. I want to focus on the core things. One of the core things is the behavior of Aaron is a big question. Why does he do what he does? So we'll see. So again, Chur is gone. They speak only to Aaron. We don't. The Medrash says they killed the Chur, but that's not in the text. But Aaron is the one that they approach. Aaron, after all, he is the second in command, and he's also a religious figure. He's going to become the high priest. In fact, he's already been singled out as priest back in chapter 29, which we skipped. So they go to Aaron, and they're asking for something religious. So we go to Aaron, who's a great religious figure, and Aaron says, "Parkun is mehaz zahav asher b'yosneinu sheichem b'nechem uvnotechem v'yaviu elai." He says, "Take off the golden rings in the ears of your wives and children, sons and daughters, bring them to me." V'yitparku kol ha'am and is mehaz zahav asher b'yosneichem v'yaviu Aaron, and they do it. They take off the jewelry, they bring it to Aaron. Vayikach miyadam, and Aaron took it from them. Vayotzer oto bacheret, vayaseu egel masecha. Now, what does that mean? Vayotzer oto bacheret. So let's see how they translate that. I would say he sculpted it, but let's see how they translate. So the translation we have over here, the JPS translation, it says that he cast it in a mold, and he made it into a molten calf. I'll get back to the cheret later, but the point is, this is an important point. He doesn't just throw it into the fire and a golden calf comes out. He actually sculpts it. By yotzar, he forms it, he shapes it in a cheret, and he turns it into a molten calf. Vayomru, and they said, Ego Elohecha Yisrael asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Again, we'll come back to this. I already alluded to this. These are your gods, literally gods, O Israel, who brought you up from Egypt. Vayara Aaron, Aaron sees this. Vayiven Mizbeach Lefanav, he built an altar. Vayikra Aaron Vayomar, Chagu Hashem Machar. And Aaron said to the people, tomorrow, a festival, Lashem, Yud He Vav He, to the eternal God. Vayashkimu Macharat, Vayalu Olot, Vayasu Shlamim, and they brought Olot and Shlamim, burnt offerings and peace offerings, right? We had that before. Vayeshev Ha'am Le'achol V'shato, Vayakumu L'tzachek, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up with Tzachek to make merry. That's the short of it. That's the story of the building of the golden calf, as the Torah describes it in chapter 32. And now the question is, which has preoccupied many over the generations, what do we make of Aaron's behavior over here? So there's no way to justify the behavior, and no one actually that I know of ever justifies it. But justifying is one thing, but understanding or mitigating is something else. And many of the midrashim do try to mitigate, or at least to explain what Aaron is thinking. And basically, I think there are two main points over here as far as Aaron's behavior. One approach that's found in the commentaries, Chazal, is that what Aaron is trying to do is to stall the people. He's trying to delay it. And that is, he said, for example, at the end, he says, Chag Lashem Machar. He doesn't say Chag La'ego Machar. He says Chag Lashem Machar. And the thinking is, maybe by tomorrow, Moshe will return. I mean, that certainly makes sense if you assume that he said 40 days, okay? Which many of the commentaries assume, although it's not in the text. But they assume that. And then it's just a matter of, he's due back any moment. It's like, how do you compute the 40? Okay, so maybe by tomorrow morning, everything's going to be okay. And he says, Chag Hashem Machar. In other words, the point being that Aaron understands that what the people want, people have not abandoned God. They have abandoned God in the sense they are violating exactly what God said not to do. God said, don't make gods of silver and gold. But as we pointed out before, their initial intention is not to replace Hashem. Their intention is to have something which can actually be a vehicle, a medium for God to use. God will work through this ego.
It's to replace Moshe.
It replaced Moshe, and there's a whole discussion. The Ramban, who has, of course, his mystical readings, and others as well. Why Dafka and Hegel? What is that about? The Ramban has a Kabbalistic understanding of why a calf. Leave it out for now. But one approach is that he's trying to delay them. For example, some Midrashim say, take off the jewelry of your wives and your children. And the Midrash says, well, maybe some of the women don't want to give their jewelry, Maybe they refuse. Who knows? It's a way to delay, to stall. That's one point. Trying to delay them. And again, it's not that he thinks he's going to worship the ego. It's that you're going to serve God through the ego. That's point number one. But point number two is actually I think the main point over here about Aaron. And that is, and this is borne out by what happens later on. Moshe comes down the mountain. And Moshe, when he comes down the mountain later on, he sees what's going on, and we'll get to that maybe next week. But he gets very upset, he smashes the tablets. And Moshe sees what's going on, he breaks the luchot. We'll get to that. That's for next week. And then he actually speaks to Aaron. And this is found later in chapter 32. Let's find that pasuk over there. Chapter 32 in verse number, after he breaks the tablets and he makes them drink it, etc. And then he says to Aaron in verse number 21, Vayomer Moshe Aaron, so what do the people do to you that you brought upon them such a great sin? Again, we're skipping over a lot of different things. We'll get back to that next week. Vayomer Aaron, al yichar af Adonai, my Lord, don't be angry. You know the people. They're in a bad place. They're in a bad way. Barahu. Which is accurate. They said, make us for Elohim. Moses, the person, we know what happened to him. I said, who has gold? I threw it into the fire, and this calf came out. Now, let's spend the remaining time we have today on what Aaron says later. Let me make one point about the first point, which is the point I wanted to emphasize, and that is Atoya data et ki barahu. And here we come to, the way the people are, ki barahu, right? They're in a bad place. And here we have the fundamental difference between Moshe and Aaron. For Aaron, let's even assume, let's assume that for Aaron, it's not, and that's the point he's making over here. Let's start with the other point. I threw it into the fire, and this calf came out. Sounds like it came out magically. I threw the stuff into a fire. Lo and behold, there's a calf. But the Chumash said exactly the opposite. The Chumash didn't say it just came out. The Chumash said, "Vayatzer oto b'cheret." He sculpted it. He very distinctly made a golden calf. So what is he saying to Moshe? I threw it into the fire and the calf came out. He's making an excuse for himself. I didn't really mean to do it, but you did it. You actually sculpted it. Vayatzer oto b'cheret. That's a problem. But I think what Aaron may be saying is the following, which is true. He doesn't necessarily mean he didn't make it. He made it. What he's saying is something else, which is true. Which is, it was never, what you're seeing is not what I thought would happen. What you're seeing is what ended up happening. It starts off as a replacement for Moshe. That is true. But it very quickly becomes much more than that. It quickly becomes an object of their worship. It transforms itself from being just a means to an end in itself. And that Aaron is saying, and that I didn't expect. It took turns that I never anticipated. That's one thing that he's saying. And I think that's very true about things can always work out that way. Starts off in much more innocently, and then it becomes something very different. But the point I wanted to emphasize is verse number 22. Atoyadata eta'am ki barahu. And here we come to a fundamental difference between Moshe and Aaron. And that is what Aaron is saying, what Aaron is trying to do, basically, Aaron tries to work with the people. The people are in a certain place. People want a replacement for Moshe. The people want a golden calf. And what Aaron is saying is, people want a golden calf. That's what they are. I'm going to make for them a golden calf, but I'm going to try to do it in such a way to contain the damage. Come back tomorrow. Remember, we're worshiping Hashem. Maybe, well, I can't do anything now. You have to bring me all the jewelry. Maybe that will take some more time. But fundamentally, his approach is you work with people where they are. That's the approach of Aaron. That's a certain kind of leadership. Moshe is different. Moshe doesn't work that way. Moshe is not saying, I know where the people are, I'm going to work with them. That's not Moshe's way. Moshe has only one way. We're going to do the right thing, wherever the people may be. And maybe they won't understand anything I'm teaching them for many years. Maybe they'll never understand it. Maybe another generation will understand it. But for Moshe, it's never about where the people are. Moshe is different. Moshe has absolute values. You do the right thing, whether they understand it or not, and you hope that someday they will understand it. It may take a long time. Sometimes it takes generations to understand what someone's actually saying. But that's the way. Fundamentally, Moshe and Aaron are completely different modes of leadership. And I don't think that the Chumash necessarily say that what is always right and what is always wrong. I think the Chumash presents us with two different models of leadership. Moshe and Aaron represent two different models of leadership altogether. And that's, I think, what Aaron's about. What Aaron is fundamentally about is there's a kind of acceptance of where people are. That's what Aaron's about. You accept where they are, and you try to make the best of it. And for Moshe, that's not Moshe. Moshe never accepts where people are. Moshe always is about doing what is in absolute terms right. So I think that's in terms of Aaron, is this defense of Aaron, it's an explanation of Aaron. I think this is critical. That's only one way to read it. And when Aaron says, I threw it into the fire and this came out, you can read this as Aaron not taking responsibility. You can certainly read it that way. I prefer to read it the other way because I think it's actually true in the story. I think it's actually a good reading is that they didn't intend to replace God at all. And Aaron says that. Chag Hashem machar. He doesn't say Chag Ego machar, he says Chag Hashem machar. But what happens in general and often with idolatry is things progress or things move in ways in which you don't expect them to move. And that we see in the Chumash over and over again. For example, I'll give an example of this. This is the story of the golden calf, but there's another golden calf story in the Torah, a very important one. I call it Egel 2, which is the story of Baal Pa'ar. Story of Baal Peor is the Egel of the second generation. And it didn't start with idolatry. It starts with the women, right? It starts with the Moabite women. They got involved with the Moabite women. That leads to worship of the Moabite god. And that's how things work in life. You get into situations, and then from there you move to another place. It goes downhill from there. In general, that's true. When it comes to idolatry, it's something the Chumash is extremely vigilant about. And that's the story of the Baal Peor, and that's the aftermath of the Egel, etc., etc. And I think the rabbinic tradition actually works with this to some great extent, making a fence around the Torah, and a recognition that you can start in one place, and very quickly you end up in a completely different place. But coming back to Aaron, I don't think the Chumash ever intends to say Aaron is not guilty of something. But here I'll just leave you with the following observation about Aaron. That in the Sefer Devarim, which retells the story of the golden calf, maybe someday we'll get to that, there's so much here, but we only have a couple more weeks for these sessions. Or maybe we'll continue with the golden calf even afterwards to some extent. But in the book of Devarim, we have the following pasuk. Moshe is talking, Uvi'aron hitanaf Hashem ba'od lahashmido. God was angry at Aaron. God wanted to destroy Aaron. And I prayed for Aaron at that time. That's a verse in the book of Devarim. What's striking is that in our story of the golden calf, there's never a suggestion that God is angry at Aaron. Certainly no suggestion God is going to destroy Aaron. Other people die. Aaron is not touched at all in the story. Aaron is not threatened in the story. In the book of Devarim, Aaron is actually threatened. God wanted to kill Aaron. There's no such statement made in the book of Shemot, and I think that's something to think about, and I have something to say about that, not for now. In any event, the question of Aaron's role is a central question over here, and I made a suggestion about how to understand it. And there's no question that within the tradition, which of course is interested in defending Aaron, given the fact that Aaron is seen in many places as Moshe's full partner, and he is the high priest on top of it. He's the one that will enter into the Holy of Holies to atone for all of Israel. And the question is, how can that be, given his central role in the construction of the golden calf, which is the great crime of the desert? It's a crime in and of itself, and especially a crime given the fact that it comes right after the Ten Commandments, right after the tablets of the covenant. It's a breaking of the covenant. So Aaron's role has to be further examined. But this is in terms of what I said so far. It's a way to at least understand, to mitigate to some degree, and at least understand where Aaron is coming from. Fine.
And there was true loss because poor own nephew and the like were killed, in the process. So there was Ashemut somewhere,
Well, the Torah never says that the nephew was killed. Let's just make that very clear. That's the Medrash. Torah says nothing about Chur one way or the other. It's certainly possible, but he's not mentioned at all.
Oh.
And he's not mentioned because they wouldn't go to Chur. They would go to Chur if they have a judgment. As a judge, Chur is a judge. He's not a priest. Mm-hmm. If we assume that Chur is actually if we assume that Chur is Betzalel's grandfather, which is a live possibility and a very interesting one, right? Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur, L'Mate Yehuda. He's from the tribe of Judah. Judah may be judges, but they're not priests. And the people don't want to judge over here. The people want this person to make them a god. That's not Judah's role. That's the priest's role. So therefore, they go to Aaron. That's why Chur is not mentioned. He's irrelevant to them. He's a judge. We don't care about judgment over here. We have no Baal Davar with each other. We want a god. We want something to represent God, and that is Aaron's role. And actually, I would just leave you with the following observation, that the Mishkan, according to Rashi, is only after the golden calf. The Torah is not in order, says Rashi. The Mishkan is only after the golden calf. The Mishkan for Rashi is a kosher golden calf. It's one that God commands, and that God allows us to have under certain kinds of conditions. That's Rashi's opinion. So the Mishkan, of course, is the place where Aaron serves. He's the high priest. And the golden calf was the unkosher, the non-kosher Mishkan. is the golden calf. That's Rashi's opinion. That if not for the golden calf, there wouldn't be a Mishkan, says Rashi. It's out of order. The Torah is out of order. I'm not saying that's the best shot. The Ramban thinks the Torah fundamentally is in order, which makes a lot of sense. However, I'm just pointing out that the fact that Hur is not mentioned doesn't prove he's dead. It proves he's actually irrelevant to the story. The Medrash does claim that he's dead. So we'll have to stop at this point. We have the Rappaport lecture at 12, should be very interesting. And we will continue with the golden calf for the rest of this semester, and maybe even beyond. And then we're going to jump back and take a look at some of the laws in Parshat Mishpatim. That may take us quite a while. We'll see how long we do that. And then, of course, we have to still deal with the Mishkan. And then after all of that is done, we'll have completed this round of our study of the book of Shemot. And then we'll see where we go beyond that. But there's a lot of work still ahead of us. Thank you all. And looking forward to continuing.
And just to remind people, if you're going to be joining us for the Rappaport lecture, that is at 1 p.m. And
12, isn't it? 12 p.m.
And if you have not
No,
yet
no,
signed
it's
up,
at 12. It's at 12 noon.
PM.
It's in
yes, it's at 12 p.m.
12
It's at 12 p.m. and you can sign up online at drisha.org/classes, along with our other Sfira Zman offerings, which are now available and will be starting after Pesach. And with that, be well, take care, and I hope to see you, as many of you as possible, next week.
Okay, hope to see everyone in 45 minutes.
Toda rabah.
All right.